Welcome to Small Spark Theory. This podcast is designed as a collection of thoughts, ideas, and practical tips on using marginal gains to help your agency new business endeavours. Small Spark Theory is hosted and created by Lucy Mann, founder of Gunpowder Consulting.
Welcome back. We are back in the pod at White City Place, and today we're going to be talking about negotiation. Now, earlier this year, I signed up for a Business for Bohemians workshop run by the brilliant team at the Idler. I don't know if any of you have come across the Idler, but we'll leave details on the blog. You can do lots of amazing things like learn to play the harmonica or the ukulele, but there's also a Business for Bohemians course or number of workshops and talks which are useful, particularly for creative people in business. Anyway, this particular workshop on negotiation was led by lawyer, coach and negotiation expert Hilary Gallo. We spent a fascinating couple of hours exploring Hilary's approach to negotiation based on over 20 years' experience of solving difficult negotiations in large organisations like Clifford Chance, Accenture and Capgemini, as well as mediating small disputes and working with primary school children. Halfway through that workshop, it dawned on me how relevant Hilary's approach is for agencies. Now, many of the agency clients that I work with feel so far out of their comfort zone when they're negotiating. So I was delighted when Hilary agreed to come and talk to us today. Welcome, Hilary.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks for joining us. We've got some really interesting stuff to talk about today. But first of all, it'd be really useful if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you came to be sitting here today.
Thank you. Well, my background is that I started my career as a lawyer, and I've spent my life going away from that, if you like. I'm someone who, in the old wood for the trees metaphor, whenever I kind of get involved in detail on a tree type thing, I'm always looking at the wider wood and sort of broadening out my perspective. I kind of think that everything tends to be a mixture of sort of detailed context and looking at the broader picture. So I got very tired of being focused as a lawyer on the detail and being right all the time and having to give clients judgments, and I moved away from it. I left a big city law firm, Clifford Chance, when I was in my mid-20s, which horrified my mother. She couldn't understand what I was doing, and I went off and ran my own business. I invented things, made cufflinks and sold them to shops for a few years, and just did different things. And then I came back and I decided to be a lawyer in industry. So I did a bit more lawyering, but then realised that I wanted to get into the broader business. So I ended up eventually leaving the legal part of the business and getting involved in negotiating deals. So I negotiated deals for a while, and then I got more involved in selling deals. Then I got more interested in the people side of things, and I realised that actually everything that I was involved in trying to sort out, it wasn't about the technical nature of what we're trying to do. It was actually about the people and how they came together that was more interesting, and that led to more problems and more challenges and more opportunities. So I qualified as a mediator, I did some work, and I eventually qualified as a coach, and I ended up sort of sorting out the organisation's problems. So I became a sort of problem fixer internationally. So whenever we had a little problem on a contract, I'd kind of be asked to go and look into it, sort it out. So I kind of got myself away from that legal thing and a constant movement away from the law, which I found a bit restrictive, frankly. And then I left corporate life about 4 years ago. It just got too much for me. I became a bit restricted. I was commercial director of a big business at the time and decided it wasn't what I wanted to do. I had one client for my coaching business and an idea for a book, and I thought, I'm going to go and do that. So I've never really looked back since that point.
You mentioned your book, The Power of Soft, and we're going to be giving away a copy of that to one of our listeners. But you talk about the importance of having a strong principled core and how that allows you to have a softer and more flexible approach to negotiation. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I've always been a believer that we kind of tend to have an approach that things are one thing or another. It's a bit binary. Everything in life, we're challenged to be this or that. And it's the same with hard and soft. Are we hard? Are we soft? And my viewpoint is that we can be a bit of both. But the question is, what's the right proportion of each, and how do you do that? And this came to me, I guess, a number of situations in business particularly where we're being told that we were commercially difficult or we're too aggressive. What I kind of realised is that whether we do it in a corporate sense or a physical sense, what I was doing and what the business was doing is putting up a kind of tanks on the lawn armour to everything. So externally we were very aggressive. What I'd call our frontal position, if you like, was very warlike and hard. But actually what happened was that when clients pushed at that, when they actually challenged us, we usually gave way. There was no backing for that. There was no substance to it behind it as a centre. And it kind of caused me to realise that actually shouldn't it be the other way around? As a very simple concept, what if you were more structured and had a backbone? Basically, people refer to having a backbone, but I think that's what they mean. Have a bit of that sort of Pilates strength in the core, think about the core musculature, and then you can be more flexible and soft at the front. So it's kind of turning the way around from how we tended to be the other way, and kind of picking up some clues from Pilates and yoga and Zen on the way and saying, well, it's all about having a strong core. And as a client of mine says, if you get things organised, you almost like go into the room with a backpack of understanding what you need and what your power, what it is and where it comes from. And it frees up your hands to be more flexible in the flexible environment of what meets us.
Oh, I like that.
Because
That's
when
a
you
nice
have
analogy.
a conversation, when you go into a situation with someone, you want to be able to absorb what's going on and to be soft and flexible. You don't want to be hard and rigid. So that's how the power of soft works. And it is, people focus on soft, but it's actually the power of soft. It's a mixture of, you can only be vulnerable and giving, I think, if you have some boundaries and you have those principles. But it's having them in the right place.
Yeah.
Otherwise you come across as a bit of an arsehole.
Yeah,
If I
there
can
is
use that sort of language.
You certainly can. I think certainly since that workshop, which I think was back in February this year, and obviously we went into quite a bit of detail in that session over a couple of hours on how that approach works in negotiation. And it's something that actually I've been able to implement a little bit, even if I'm just visualising, if I'm really clear on what it is that I want and I'm confident in what it is that I'm offering and what it is that I do, then actually it takes the pressure off. You become just a little bit more relaxed and you're able to have a discussion rather than what feels like a intense negotiation. Yes.
I mean, the way I'd characterise it as I'd try to move away from my positional wants that are more frontal, what I might see as my solutions to a situation, and I would try and move back away from that into my core needs. So what am I trying to satisfy by these solutions?
Yeah.
Because if I can define that, if I can be clear of what I need at core, then I'm more flexible about how I solve those needs. People often ask us for an example, and a good one, a home one would be, demanding that my daughter's home at a certain time at night. I need you home as a parent at 10:30 at night. And you look at that need, that want, that solution, that position, and you ask yourself, what do I need? Well, I need to know my daughter's safe.
Yeah.
And I maybe want, I might need to have some assurance she's getting on with her home, her schoolwork or something. So if I can have a discussion with my daughter and solve those two things, to know that she's safe and to know that she's actually, although she's out with her friends, she's getting her homework done, if I can solve those in a different way, I can relax my constraint on her being home at 10:30.
Yeah.
So I don't have that aggressive confrontation with my teenager.
Yeah.
Because I maybe don't need to. As long as I'm more clear about what it is I'm trying to do as a parent from this demand that I've made.
Yeah.
And I think that's what gives us flexibility. And that's a wonderful thing if you can be more flexible.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, obviously you talked a little bit about your legal background. I'm wondering now, as a consultant, the types of negotiation challenges that people come to you with?
Well, I had one, for example, in an owner of a creative business came to me with a procurement challenge. And it seems to me that a lot of the time, the challenge we have as creative people is that we meet the big corporate bureaucracy of the organisation. And we maybe don't understand how that organisation works. I mean, I was a commercial director for a while, and the procurement director reported for me. So I got to understand, fortunately, the way procurement works. And it enabled me to, in this situation, to see that although we had someone commissioning this project, there was also somebody from procurement who had to be involved. And this guy from procurement, he had to show value in that. It was his job to take this project and actually in some way do something to it that showed that he was doing his job. But my client was having all sorts of clashes with procurement because procurement were coming from a completely different direction and undermining the project. So what I encouraged him to do in that situation was to bring in he had a very good relationship with the person who was procuring, his client, and the only way through in this situation, because procurement was being so difficult, was actually to just consolidate the power that he had in the relationship with the woman who was procuring the project, and to get her to make some key interventions with procurement to make sure that some boundaries were set so that he got some of the things he needed. He protected his remuneration from the project because procurement were trying to force him to basically negotiate a lower day rate.
Yeah.
But he had some boundaries that he couldn't go beyond, and he'd already given a good deal. So a lot of this was about, we had to give the procurement guy some wins. We had to give him the ability and understand what he was trying to do, and that he wasn't just trying to be evil, but it was also trying to leverage the relationship and the power that my client had to do that. He actually had all the power in this situation. He didn't realise it because he had a thing that the client desperately needed and wanted. But if you let procurement completely run the deal, they would basically seek to nullify that because their model is to commoditise everything.
Yeah.
So you have to, the more you understand it, the more you can play the game. But for me, part of this soft thing is about understanding how we use our power, and that creative people often have a lot more power than they realise, if only they see it.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned about being able to give the procurement team some other wins, so without actually capitulating on cost, being able to offer some other things instead. Typically, what kind of things would it be around payment terms, or what are the other things that you could, because I know certainly that's something that the agencies that I work with struggle with when they get faced with procurement and they just feel like their day rates are under pressure, and they don't really know where to go with that. And if you haven't got an ally, so say it's a new business example rather than an existing client, so you haven't already got the benefit of that relationship in another part of the business, what else are the tools that you can use to help?
So for me, it's all, even with the procurement people, it's relationship driven, because the more you get a trusted relationship, the more people open up to you.
Yeah.
So the more information you get about what they need. So it's very important to know what you need, but it's even more important to know what the other person needs. So if you have a good relationship with that procurement person, the trick is to be able to find out the things that they value and that are important to them, that preferably have a high value to them, but have a low value to you. So that's kind of one of the core tricks of a negotiation.
Right.
So your day rate has a huge value to you because it counts in numbers. But how you might sell that or portray it in their model might have more value to them. And you can actually play their game if you can find out the things that matter to them.
Yeah.
For example, in this situation, the way they measured the day was important to them.
Okay.
So once my client understood how they measured the day, he was able to massage his days to achieve a higher day rate for him.
Right.
Using their model. If he hadn't understood that, he would have suffered. And it's different in every situation, in every context, but unless we know these things, how can we construct things that work for both parties? That's why having a relationship and having trust and getting people to tell you these things is critical, because everything's contextual and you need to know. And sometimes it's this mixture between detail and understanding the trees and the wood. sometimes we need to understand a bit of the detail, the matter, so we can play with it, design something creative that works for us but also delivers them what they need.
Good. So again, ask more questions.
I'm afraid so,
Always ask more questions.
The irony is that as humans we will tend to want to race towards an answer, a quick solution, and we often won't ask all those questions because it seems quite time consuming. I've found again and again the truth is you actually, if you spend more time getting answers to those questions, you'll get to the end result quicker.
Yes.
It just doesn't seem like it and you don't realise it at the beginning. But all of us know we've been in situations we've gone for the quick answer and we're still there months later.
It's a panic thing, I think, though, isn't it? Often when you're in that situation and it doesn't feel a natural situation and you feel a bit out of your comfort zone, I think a panic sets in and you just think, oh God, well, I've got to make a decision on this now. We've got to just do it and get it out of the way, which is the wrong approach.
You're absolutely right. There's something in human psychology that causes us to race towards certainty. I think, again, it's probably a power thing, but we love our certainty and solutions more than we love our inquiry. And it's kind of not helping us in this modern world. That primeval thing is not helping.
No.
Like everything, it's a balance of intellect and emotions. You need a bit of intellectual control to stop your emotional drive towards, somebody else would call it the sort of little chimp inside you. That's rushing to have the chimp's answer. Sometimes it's the balance again. You can't be either too intellectual and clever and you can't be too emotional, but one needs to control the other.
Balance the two.
Balance the two, yeah.
I'm interested to understand where you've seen some really, because I know you do a lot of coaching and you work with leaders in organisations to help them. I'd love to know the kind of breakthroughs and transformations that you've experienced working with your clients.
One of the things that commonly, a lot of what I'm doing is helping people go through what I call a leadership transition.
Yeah.
So it's a movement from when you get promoted in an organisation or when you take on your own business, you go from you have this difficult transition between being an expert in a thing and getting to where you are because you're brilliant at that thing, to then how do I become a leader in which I need to let go of the thing and I need to stop being an expert in order to be able to give vision to where my business is going to go and to be able to do strategy and to be able to delegate stuff. And a lot of where I see people struggling to hold on to the expert bit of themselves is fear related. So I find fear and insecurity coming up a lot. And it's interesting how it pops up as a problem for people in their 30s or 40s. Because it's something we've avoided maybe until we get to the stage where in order to grow and move on further and become exceptional, actually you need to grow beyond your fear. You need to get to a state where you take on your fear and you start to have more of a relationship and a dialogue with it. You start to interrogate what your fears really are and start to maybe do some things that scare you more and realise that actually most of the people who make real exceptional success in life are always a little bit scared. They've always got that butterfly in their stomach because what they're doing, whether it's standing on a stage in front of a large bunch of people or setting up an event that you don't know whether anyone's actually going to turn up, that's scary. But unless you do it, unless you put yourself outside your comfort zone, you're not in that zone where you're actually growing, because the only way to be secure is to do what you've always done, which will keep you where you always have been. And the only time you'll be really comfortable is when you're dead, because that's when the emotions will stop. So in order to be doing exciting, interesting things, you need to get used to that frisson of fear. And I had a session with a new CEO of a big business recently, and that was what she was struggling with. She was doing brilliant things, but she felt she was insecure in her achievement. And the session was really about helping her normalise that and say, look, that's okay. She was actually brilliant at what she does, and she needs to do more of it and get more comfortable with that slightly insecure feeling.
I think that will resonate with quite a few of our listeners. I know that resonates with me. certainly. And now I'm wondering, we've asked all of our contributors in this series to give us their top 3 tips. So now I know there's a lot of really, really useful information in your book. So I'm going to suggest that everybody goes out and buys the book. And in fact, I know that you recently did a panel discussion for YCN. I know at least one of the people in the audience said to me the next day that they'd been and bought your book based on that short discussion. So I'm going to recommend that everybody go and buy The Power of Soft by Hilary. But in the meantime, what are your top 3 tips for better negotiation?
Yeah, as you say, difficult to think of top 3, but just 3 off the top of the head. Particularly in my time in business, I was shocked how many times I had to tell people to stop negotiating with themselves.
Yep, okay.
So how often do you find yourself in a room talking to yourself about what your day rate should be and saying, well, that's too much? So you find yourself having this internal dialogue with your very self. And that's crazy. You've got to stop doing that. You can only negotiate with your client.
Yeah.
And you can only negotiate based on the basis of what they say, as opposed to what you think they've said or what they might say, or negotiate with yourself in the mirror. By all means, if you think you're taking the mickey with your day rate, then maybe you need to think about that. But I would encourage people to talk to a colleague about what they think is a good day rate. But I've done that, and I've been given 2 numbers which vary wildly, talking to 2 different people. So it's an inexact science, that particular day rate example, but don't negotiate with yourself. And if you don't lose something like a third of your business through being too expensive, you're not pricing yourself right. Would be another test.
Good.
If you're not losing business, you're too cheap. But this is all about basing what you do on, not basing it on assumptions in your own internal dialogue, but basing it on reality, which is a huge subject in itself. So don't negotiate with yourself would be the first one. Another one would be, if someone's still talking, they're still negotiating. So how often is it that people say to you, that's my final deal, I can't go any further, the thing's over? They'll tell you that that's their bottom line, that's no more, or you're too expensive. It happened, this procurement example, my client was too expensive. Well, why is the procurement client desperate to talk to him and desperate to close the deal and always phoning him back and taking his calls if he's too expensive? And the truth was he wasn't. He was probably too cheap. So I would encourage people to watch the behaviour of people. If people are still talking to you and they're still returning your calls and they're still in dialogue, you're still negotiating, whatever they say. And the dangerous person is the person who genuinely shuts the door and refuses to speak to you ever again.
Yeah.
That's when the negotiation really is over. But it's almost like when you watch the movies and the hostage taker never shoots the hostage. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
The hostage taker keeps the hostage alive because the negotiation is continuing.
Yeah.
And it's that situation that we don't realise the point at which it really, really is over, as opposed to when we think people are threatening it's over. People use that threat far too much.
Excellent advice.
So keep negotiating as long as they're still talking. A final one would be about options. It's a thing that can help us with the idea of not locking onto one position. Always think about providing someone with multiple options in a situation, particularly when you get towards the back end of a negotiation. If you tell someone, well, I can do this rate or this financial structure, but it comes with these parameters, or I can do this with these parameters, or maybe another option. So you create multiple options. And as you get towards the end of your negotiations, actually those financially are all stack up quite similarly.
Yeah.
Firstly, they know you haven't got a lot further to go, so it's a signal you're nearing the end of your range. But secondly, they'll start talking about the various options. Instead of trying to negotiate you further, they'll start considering which one's best.
Right.
So their internal dialogue and their actual dialogue starts to be about evaluating the options. And then you know you're going to get a deal. You've changed their focus rather than being from what they want versus what you're offering them to being which option do they choose. Options are also really good because they give them something to go towards. If you can create something for people to go towards, then you're halfway to solving the problem. It's a bit like, I have a thing on the back of the book which the publisher called out, and it says also helps you get your children to bed.
Yeah.
So a lot of people say, well, how do you get your children to bed? And that's a good example of options, because my answer to that is, instead of saying to your child, it's time to go to bed, which is giving them something to rebel against, something to not want to do. If you say to your child, what story do you want me to read you in bed? Immediately you've given them an option, or you've given them the ability to create an option. So the child's likely to start thinking, which story would I like tonight? Is it this one, that one, or the other one? But it's something to go towards. It's a fun experience that culminates in going to bed, or gets them into bed, but it's a nice thing on the way. So human beings, weird as we are, we like to go towards things. We're either going towards things or we're running away from things. So if you know that, you can utilise it and create something for people to go towards. Brilliant. It's a really simple thing, but
very good. They are ninja negotiation skills. Thank you very much. I'd like to know, what's the best piece of advice that you've been given that's really stuck with you?
Well, it's a really weird thing. I was at a place called Anderson Consulting. It became Accenture. And I was trying to make partner in this organisation. This was eons ago. And my boss at the time called me into his office to give me the news about whether I'd made the big grade, and I hadn't. And I had this state of mind to ask him at the time, what did he think I should do? And he's a wily Welshman who had an answer to everything. And he said to me, very honestly, he said, look, what I see you doing is trying to wait for us to make you up to this position. You're kind of playing the hierarchy and expecting this thing, this title. He said, it's not really what it's cracked up to be. And when you get to it, you realise how hard it is. He said, what I'd advise you to do is just go out there and be more of who you are, and to act like you are a partner, and to do more risky stuff. And if you do that, we'll have no choice but to make you partner. And that's kind of the subject for my next book, which is, it comes into a much wider discussion of where you see power, whether you see it in the hierarchy or whether you see it in your own possibility. And I've kind of spent the rest of my life trying to live up to that question. So it's not a piece of advice I've routinely followed. It's more a challenge. How can you be more of who you are and take more risks, rather than expecting someone to hand you something? How often do we wait around waiting for that promotion, when really, when we get it, then is when the journey really starts? Why not start doing the stuff now? I guess that's a piece of advice that's really changed me, and that I constantly look at and think, am I living up to that? Because a lot of the time I won't be.
No.
Because it's really tough. I mean, it's really scary to go and do these things. So I'm still hoping that I'm living a good answer to that piece of advice. And often I'm not. And I ask myself, why not? What am I scared of?
Right. That's a really good piece of advice. Okay, now, what would be your favourite book or TED Talk or most inspiring figure?
Well, can I slightly break the rules? Because
of
that genre, the thing that we've ended up as a family liking, that's my wife and my son and daughter, we love a film that not everyone likes, called Love Actually.
Love Actually.
And so it's a film that I know has its imperfections, but Richard Curtis, who's the genius behind the film, is someone who, I mean, we could talk for an hour on the genius of Richard Curtis and the things he's done and how he's done it. And I came in the other night and my son was just starting to watch About Time, which is another of his films, which again is an awesome film that if you haven't seen, I would encourage anyone to see. And he just manages to do a drama where he relays so many deep messages about life, with a vision that I just think, well, where did you get that smart? And Love Actually is little things like the way it opens and the way Hugh Grant gives as an opening, as a narrative. And he talks about the people greeting, maybe at the beginning or at the end, and he talks about people greeting each other at airports. There is a wonderful thing about being greeted at an airport and about seeing someone you didn't expect. And then he makes a comment about when the planes hit the Twin Towers, how many of the calls were from people expressing messages of hate. No, they weren't. They were about people phoning the people who really mattered to them and the people they loved. And there's something in that setting up and the narrative about what are the really important things in life? What is important in life? And as a family, we tend to watch Love Actually every Christmas because it's kind of Christmassy.
Yeah.
And I love the way not only I get something out of it every time I watch it, but my kids. And it's become a kind of family tradition that goes beyond any book I've ever read or any, I could name TED Talks or podcasts or whatever, but it's affected me and my children in a way that's quite deep and caring. And so I'd pick that because in a way the effect I can have on the next generation, and to see the things that my children do and that their friends do, that's kind of the most important thing to me. I can read stuff in a book, but most of what I read about in books, all respect to my own book and being a writer, but the challenge is not what you read in the book, the challenge is what you do in your life.
Yes.
And what
you
you
do
change and what you do with it on the field of life. And that's really hard. So that's where my interest lies and why I love that film, because it's real. It's a film, it's not entirely real, it's made up, but it kind of shows situations you can connect to, of flawed people.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Hilary, you have been a brilliant guest. I know there's lots of really, really useful stuff in there for our listeners. Thank you very much.
My utter pleasure, Lucy. Thank you.
It's time for our competition. As always, we're going to be giving away a copy of Hilary's book, The Power of Soft. If you join in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #SmallSparkTheory, we'll pick a winner. You have been listening to Small Spark Theory, brought to you by Gunpowder Consulting. Join in the conversation on Twitter at Gunpowder Tweets, #SmallSparkTheory. The podcast is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann. Our editor is Claire Aban and our producer is Isabel Jarvis. Music is provided by Juke Deck, available at jukedeck.com. This episode was recorded at the pod at White City Place. For more information and to download further episodes, head to our blog at gunpowderconsulting.com, and if you like what you hear, head to iTunes and leave us a star.